Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Brooklyn in Love, a delicious memoir of food, family, and finding yourself, by Amy Thomas. Narrated by Cassandra Campbell. And in almost every dish, you can find, besides the culinary ingredients, the ingredients of a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Michael Pollan, Cook. All dreams are crazy until they come true. Nike ad. Author's note. Memory is a tricky thing. This is our story as best as I remember, corroborated by Andrew. But it's been written alternately under the influence of sugar or alcohol, in a food coma, or with postnatal hormones surging through my body, and some details may be blurred as a result. Introduction. In the fall of 2008, fate walked through my office door. At the time, I was an associate creative director at the New York office of an international ad agency. A 30-something career woman with an active social and dating life, I also moonlighted as a food and travel writer. I dined out more often than I ate in and was obsessed with chocolate, pastries, and all things sweet. Life was good. And then, in a Hollywood-scripted moment, the in-house recruiter of my agency asked me what I thought of Paris. Our office there was looking for an English-speaking writer to work on one of France's most iconic luxury marks, Louis Vuitton. Single and 36, afflicted with francophilia and wanderlust, it took but a moment to decide, bien sûr. So began 2 dreamy years in the city of light and dark chocolate. I built an award-winning portfolio of work, and even better, I got to eat warm pain au raisin for breakfast every day. My commute was hopping on one of the city's bikes, the Vélib', and riding through the Place de la Concorde and up the Champs-Élysées to a stunning Haussmann building with Eiffel Tower views. On the weekends, I tried cooking classes, toured historic boulangeries, and walked miles and miles until the city was mine. With France's generous holiday and vacation policies, I traveled to Portugal, Belgium, England, Italy, and the charming villages and ancient cities throughout France. And the biggest triumph of all was realizing my own personal dream, getting a book contract, which would share some of those very adventures I was having in Paris. But after 3 successive contract renewals with my agency, I opted out. I decided I was too old to settle permanently in a foreign city. As wonderful as Paris was, I missed my friends and family back in the States. My carefree life of bicycling and pastry binging in Paris probably wouldn't get any better. Maybe I should quit before the Parisians' maddening ability to make things difficult started bringing me down. I deliberated, vacillated, and in a move as bittersweet as when I packed up for Paris, I rewound 5 time zones, swapping macarons and croissants for cookies and donuts, and returned to my job and life in New York. It wasn't an easy transition. In fact, I found repatriating harder than moving abroad. It took me longer to settle back into my comfort zone than it did to adjust to moving to Paris in the first place. I could never shake the sense of being stuck between 2 cities and loves. Besides, how do you top a life filled with French fashion advertising, daily pastry sampling, and dinners and parties among the chicest human specimens on earth? After the golden glow of Paris's limestone boulevards, the romantic promise of it all, New York appeared gray, dingy, and harsh. With a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity behind me and major life goal accomplished, I realized that I had not only closed a chapter of my life, but also seemingly finished the entire first act. Pre-Paris, I had been at the height of my swinging single 30s. Now, after a couple years romping around Europe, I was staring at the abyss of middle age. Pre-Paris, I had been so focused on getting a book published. Now it was written, my mission complete. Pre-Paris, I had been cranking away in advertising without any intentional goals or finish lines. Now, I realized, I'd be hard-pressed to find any accounts at any ad agencies that were better than Louis Vuitton, and my career's finish line seemed uncomfortably close. On the cusp of 40, I started doing some major soul-searching. If my first act was over, what was Act 2 supposed to look like? A new career? A move to Brooklyn? Another book? Should I cash in all my chips and go on an open-ended, around-the-world adventure? For the first time in eons, I didn't have the answers or a focus. There were no urgent needs or goals. All the go-go-go ambition and adrenaline that had sustained me for 2 decades risked being relegated to my past. Plodding along in corporate advertising, I felt myself fading to irrelevance and craving something new. Once the love of my life, New York wasn't getting my heart racing the way it once had, not like food still did. Food was more than a personal obsession and the means to a cushy moonlight gig. It helped chronicle my relationship with the city in which I lived. It was how I organized my itinerary when I traveled. It grounded my social life and became the lens through which I saw and made sense of everything. And it was about to become the landmark for everything that happened in my life. Part 1. First Comes Love. Chapter 1. Alternative American Apple Pie. New York City. Ask people what they love about it, and you'll get any one of a million answers. Broadway shows, world-class restaurants, incredible museums, inspiring architecture. Little Italy, Central Park, Soho, Wall Street. Top of the Rock, the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, the Brooklyn Bridge. Piano bars, sports bars, cocktail bars, dive bars. Diversity, energy, glamour, history. Shopping, boozing, people watching, dancing the night away. Cannoli, cookies, and cupcakes everywhere. And when you live in the 8.5 million-person metropolis, there are even more nuanced and magical things to love. Dog walkers who deftly carry the leashes of 6 different size breeds, all trotting down the street in sync. Window shopping at Bergdorf Goodman and bargain hunting at Century 21. Kamikaze bicyclists who deliver your pad thai, sag paneer, or spicy tuna rolls at all hours, in any kind of weather. Obsessing about real estate, the way the rising or setting sun cascades down the skyrocketing buildings. Greasy egg sandwiches from the corner bodegas, so dirty but so delicious. The New York Times Sunday Styles section, the New York Post's over-the-top headlines, and Pat Kiernan on New York One. Dining as a competitive sport. The scientists, chefs, poets, entrepreneurs, and socialites on the 92nd Street Wise program. Yet when I returned to New York in the winter of 2011, after 2 years of working, eating, and embracing joie de vivre in Paris, I wasn't feeling the love. Trying to reacclimate in the bitterly cold, undeniably filthy city, I couldn't shake my ennui. I couldn't shed the weight I had put on in my final feeding frenzy in Paris, convinced as I had been that I would never have the opportunity to eat freshly baked pain au chocolat or hot and melty Nutella street crepes again. And I couldn't evade New York's germs. As soon as I recovered from one illness, I'd get sick all over again, attracting ailments and allergies I'd been immune to my whole life. It wasn't the triumphant homecoming I had envisioned. More than just feeling physically out of sorts, I felt emotionally adrift. Coming home after 2 intensely profound and fulfilling years in the most beautiful city in the world was harder than moving abroad to a city where I knew no one. There was no distraction of a foreign culture, no challenge of learning a new language or meeting new people, and no promise of what might be. There was no French romance. I was back in familiar territory, among people, places, and things I knew and had always loved, and yet everything had changed. Most of all, me. I had seen, smelled, and tasted new worlds in France. As full as I was with these fresh memories and the wonderful relationships I had developed along the way, they left me with a new emptiness. I was here, they were over there. And all those magical, transformative experiences would never be again. Poof, history, an era of my life gone, and I had been the one to bring it to an end. It was also difficult because everything in New York had changed in the 2 years I had been gone. At the agency I returned to, colleagues had been laid off during the financial crisis, and the company restructured. Friends had left the city for suburban pastures, and seemingly everyone on the island of Manhattan had gotten married and had a baby. Each change and event was relatively small, but added up to a seismic shift in the world I once knew. Everything I remembered that once made me happy now made me uncomfortable. I had pined for New York while in Paris, but now that I was back, I was out of sorts. I was divided, emotionally amiss. My heart belonged to 2 cities, and now neither one of them was entirely home. Feeling chubby, frumpy, and constantly sick, it wasn't exactly a sizzling dating phase. Nights out with my best friend of 30 years, AJ, who was my partner in crime the years before leaving for Paris but had since gotten hitched and had a baby, were now few and far between. AJ and I did get out for the occasional cocktail, which sometimes led to a late-night flirtation or make-out session in the back of some meat-packing district club, but mostly my dating life limped along. There was the lawyer, a very decent, kind man, to be sure, but who had such a schlumpy, downtrodden air about him that I was depressed 3 sips into our first date. The Jersey boy, straight out of central casting with rippling muscles, tats, waxed brows, and perfect veneers, which should have made me swoon but instead just made me giggle. And the super-cool Yale alum, who was just my speed of preppy and intellectual, and with whom I had several interesting dates, a retro movie at Film Forum, a slow stroll through the Museum of the City of New York, tea in the afternoon. But when the 4th date ended with another deliberately chaste kiss, I realized my passion for him would be best directed elsewhere. And I had passion in reserves. Dear God, I was bursting with it. I had been secretly keeping track in my head and could no longer deny the sad fact. I hadn't had sex in over a year. Every time I watched Sex and the City reruns, as I was wont to do while devouring a pint of Ben & Jerry's on all those cold winter nights, nursing my various colds, ailments, and steadily shrinking ego, I was in awe of the glut of fun, eligible men parading through Carrie's, Miranda's, Charlotte's, and of course Samantha's lives. Such variety, such intrigue and promise, such testosterone. What had happened in the past 10 years? Where did a sister need to go to get laid in New York in 2011? One night over dinner at Porcina, a small Italian restaurant in the East Village, I recounted my dating misadventures to my friend Joe. The consummate New York bachelor, he was 40-something, well-to-do, and had impossibly high standards. Joe liked smart, cultured, accomplished women. They just also had to have the face of a Bulgarian fashion model and the body of a yoga instructor, the last point being most essential to him. When he suggested that my teeny chest might be why I didn't have a man in my life, I sat, stunned, 2 plates of pasta on the table between us, one of which I suddenly envisioned over his head. It was the dumbest, most infuriating thing I had ever heard. It was also the kick in the pants that got me back to online dating. Once upon a time, online dating was a stigmatized concept, reserved for desperados and unsavories. But by now, at least in New York, it was just another place, like the office, a bar, or Whole Foods, to meet people. Before Paris, I dipped my toe in the pool on Nerve.com, which was a relatively small dating site that attracted edgy artistic types. At the time, it felt bold and adventurous to be browsing men's profiles as if I were shopping for groceries. But in the years since then, the industry had exploded and the offerings had expanded. 4 out of 5 single people had at least tried it, and 1 out of 6 married couples in the United States met online. Match.com was the biggest site, having started in 1995, when I was wearing double chambray and listening to the Grateful Dead, and now counted millions of members around the world. Other smaller niche sites joined throughout the years, sites for Jews, Christians, and Ivy Leaguers, sites for college students and sites for senior citizens, sites that matched you based on a suggested date, like kayaking in the Hudson River, or your physical location, which led to instant hookups. Sites based on DNA, some for single parents, and others that targeted married people looking for affairs. As one of the founders of OkCupid, a site predicated on answering a series of yes-or-no questions that joined the onslaught in 2009, said in a New Yorker article, "We are the most important search engine on the web, not Google." My friends actually raved about this OkCupid site, saying it was fun answering all those questions. There were tens of thousands of them, ranging from offbeat and quirky to deadly serious. Pourquoi pas? I thought one night at home, glancing down at my A-cups that Joe had belittled. Why not enter the fray again? I gathered some photos, entered my stats, and started answering away. Could you date someone who was really messy? Is smoking disgusting? Do spelling mistakes annoy you? And with several dozen surprisingly telling yeses and nos, I was back in the online dating world. I don't know if it was the increased acceptance of online dating in general or the popularity of this particular site, but the pickings were slimmer. On Nerve, I had met journalists, bankers, producers, designers, scientists, even a Frenchie. I remember them as articulate, ambitious, and interesting. Where were these natty, witty gents now? The smart but goofy guys. The professional, intriguing, down-to-earth characters. And while I was in cranky old lady mode, what had happened to modesty? Every time I logged in, I struggled to find someone I might enjoy meeting face-to-face. There was so much chest-beating and obnoxious posturing. Photos seemingly selected to say, "Here I am on a yacht. Look at all these beautiful people I'm surrounded by. Isn't my life fabulous? Don't you want a piece of this?" And yet I also didn't want the sensitive, almost effeminate guys I used to go for. Those multi-hyphenate writer/photographer/industrial designer/musicians used to be my catnip. Now I was too old and cynical to hang out in dive bars, encouraging man-boys' dreams of making it big while splitting the bill like a good progressive woman. I had reached a place in my life where I wanted someone who no longer slept on a futon, who owned some decent neckties and shoes, and who didn't balk at spending $20 on a stranger. The months ticked by. I was winked at, the lazy way of expressing interest online, by guys in their 20s who probably thought they were being sweet by coming on to an older woman. I also received inquiries from earnest men in their 50s and 60s, suggesting an afternoon glass of wine. But when it came to the guys in my box, in their late 30s or 40s, who appeared well-groomed, sounded well-informed, and who wrote well in their profiles, well, they were conspicuously absent. The site claimed tens of thousands of users online at any given moment, but for me, it was a desert. But why was I surprised? After all, Joe himself had divulged that he not only trolled for women who were 10 to 15 years younger than him, but he had also shaved 8 years off his own age in order to seem a more appropriate match for these ladies. Apparently, if I expected to find love online, I needed to pump up my chest and dial down my age. It wasn't all dire. One day I had an intriguing message in my OkCupid mailbox. It was a concise note bordering on formal, but it contained just enough intelligence, humor, and modesty for me to click through to the profile. This guy grew up in the Midwest and now lived in Brooklyn. He'd spent time living in France as well as Senegal. He had dark curly hair and thick-framed glasses. One of his profile photos was an awkward selfie he had taken in his full-length mirror, wearing a black izod with the collar popped. This was somehow endearing. My fingers tap-tap-tapped my desk as I reread his note. It was another Friday night chez moi. I was 6 minutes away from a pint of fish food in Season 3 of Sex and the City, the one when Carrie meets Aiden. I could hear the shrieks of drunk NYU girls outside my East Village apartment, and sense my black tabby cat Milo waiting for me on the couch. "That's it," I said aloud in my living room, staring at this stranger's photo. "I'm having sex with him." 1 week and a couple polite back-and-forth emails later, I was walking down 15th Street to meet my potential seducer. "Andrew?" I asked a bespectacled guy with his nose down in his iPhone outside Park Bar. "Hi," he said, smoothly sliding the phone in his coat pocket. "I'm Amy." "Andrew. Hi, I'm Andrew," he responded, realizing that had already been established. "Hi." I smiled, absorbing the awkward moment. "Shall we?" he asked, gesturing to the door. Inside, 2 stools stood auspiciously empty at the bar amid the bustling post-work crowd. I ordered my go-to glass of Pinot Noir, and after a moment of what looked like indecision or internal debate, Andrew ordered the same. "So you were coming from work, I suppose?" he asked, kicking off what was now a routine conversation. Despite my sad track record, or maybe because of it, I had first dates pretty much down. You compared notes about where you lived in the city, what you did for a living, and how you liked spending your free time, about an hour's worth of chit-chat. It was rarely romantic or steamy, more like a job interview when you're trying to make a good impression while striking the right balance of talking and listening, coming off as interested but certainly not over-eager. Some guys got off on talking about online dating itself, sharing anecdotes about previous dates gone awry, or it never failed, how crazy New York women are. Others consciously avoided the topic, probably preferring to pretend we had met in a more palatable way. Travel, family, and hobbies indicated broaching intimacy and could lead to revelatory discussions. But everyone had their own tests. I always brought up food and restaurants to gauge a man's awareness of and appetite for what I considered essential topics, like Andrew Carmelini's newest venture, or which of the swanky midtown hotel bars made the best Manhattan in the city. Andrew didn't rattle off the names of chefs or trendy restaurants when I started waxing poetic about the season's newest crop of hip restaurant openings, but he did share that the best meal he'd had in New York was at Babbo, Mario Batali's acclaimed 3-star Italian restaurant, an instant classic when it opened in 1998, which I saw as very promising. Our 2 rounds, a sign that the date was engaging enough not to send one of us packing with a made-up obligation after 1 drink, were spent talking about writing. He was a legal affairs journalist at an international news agency located in Midtown and a fan of Michael Lewis. Living abroad, a Fulbright scholarship had been responsible for his stint in Senegal, and what we did on weekends. He was a big fan of college basketball. Not terribly exciting or sexy, but there were worse things. It was just another first date in another bar on another weeknight in the great big bustling city of New York. It had been a nice couple of hours, friendly but benign. So when he leaned in and quickly but firmly kissed me before descending into the Union Station subway station, I was a little surprised. Was he feeling something I wasn't? Apparently, and fortunately, he was. because our second date was a whole different story. "So what do you think about Bloomberg?" I asked, intentionally steering the conversation into politics, a potential minefield and telltale topic for detecting irreconcilable differences halfway into our first drink. We were huddled against a fogged-up window at an Upper West Side wine bar. Outside, a freak October snowstorm was dumping flakes fast and furiously. I had thought myself so clever when Andrew asked for a second date, and I suggested an early evening drink that I'd cram in before a friend's dinner party uptown. Unsure of this guy, I had wanted to have an easy out. But as the minutes ticked by, I was more and more annoyed that I had to be somewhere in an hour's time. I was feeling cozy and smitten, and wanted to keep gazing at this charming man sitting across from me. He had an awesome head of curly hair, which was becoming increasingly disheveled since he occasionally raked his hand through it. Behind his glasses, which were brainy and preppy, just like his pinstripe button-down, were chocolate-brown eyes. You know, he can be a real dick, but I think he's a pretty great mayor in terms of getting things done, Andrew said. It gave me a small thrill when he said dick, not because I was that horny, but because he otherwise seemed like such a wholesome Midwesterner. I was happy to know he had some edge, or at least the wherewithal to cuss. As he went on about our controversial 3-term mayor, the depth of his knowledge impressed me. I kept trying to suppress a smile, feeling like the Cheshire Cat. But if I wasn't mistaken, he was looking pretty content, too. We comfortably drifted into sun-dried topics like the virtue versus burden of subscribing to the New Yorker, and whether guys who do yoga are cool or annoying. I learned Bob Dylan was his music hero, and shared that Chrissie Hynde was mine. We bantered like friends who hadn't seen each other in months and had so much to catch up on. Yet I desperately wanted to make out with him. We ordered another round of Italian reds served in oversized goblets. I was simultaneously keeping track of and ignoring the time, knowing I was due at my friend's. Finally, I was really late and had to go. Outside, we huddled under my umbrella. The air was both still from the falling snow and charged with the energy of something unusual happening. Giant flakes cartwheeled beneath the streetlights, and taxis slowly steered up the avenue. We reached the corner and were watching a cab make its way to us in slow motion when Andrew turned and kissed me, and kissed me, and kissed me. I don't know if it was because it had been so long since I had been properly kissed, or if we had amazing chemistry, but the only reason I wanted to leave him and go to this dinner party now was to recount this magical encounter to my friends, which I did for the rest of the night ad nauseum. It had been such a great date, I figured I would get a text from Andrew the next day. When I didn't, I thought maybe, in true dude fashion, he was waiting for the start of the work week. But I heard nothing from him on Monday. When Tuesday came and went without any sort of acknowledgement of the unbelievable time we'd had, I was as furious as I was flummoxed. I was pretty sure I hadn't misread any cues. The knowing glances and smiles, the easy rapport, the heavy make-out session. Why was he blowing me off? Was I so rusty that the connection I felt was all one-sided? Was Andrew out doing this with a different woman every night? Normally, I wouldn't wait for the guy to initiate contact. A proud feminist who grew up watching Martha Quinn and Madonna on TV, and Watts and Tess and some kind of wonderful and working girl, I knew I could do anything that men did. I had no problem popping off an email or text when interested. But I had recently been burned, not once but twice, thinking I was clicking with a guy only to get ghosted when I reached out after a couple of dates. I was okay being vulnerable, but was over feeling like a fool. Plus, as I got older, I was apparently getting a little old-fashioned. Was it really so bad to want the guy to pursue me? I consulted with AJ's husband, Mitchell, who was well-versed in modern dating manners. He suggested that I give it one more...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?